anyone sort of who was involved in the protest, anyone who had a high profile was targeted. But I think that fear became so pronounced that even regular citizens who might not have been active in the protest or just simply disagreed with the third mandate were just scared to speak. Hey guys, this is Danny Golds, producer and correspondent for Vice News. I just returned from a trip to Burundi where we were reporting on the presidential elections and the disputed nature of them and all the sort of chaos surrounding what was going on. I'm here to take your questions about what's happening in Burundi, what we saw there, and what we think is going to happen in the future. So let's get started, yeah?
Yeah, let's get started. Dan, thanks for being here. We've got a bunch of people who are lined up to call or to speak with you today. Some of them are dealing with some connections issues, so we're going to try to get even more people to talk to while we're live. But let's start with our first caller, and that's Trevor.
Hey, Trevor, how's it going?
Good. First of all, thanks so much for having me. My first question is, what do you think about the dynamic between the political corruption of the ruling party and how that interacts with the ongoing socioeconomic crisis in Burundi?
That's a really good question. We didn't have too much time to dive deep into that, but there's a feeling amongst everyone on the ground, especially amongst the opposition, that the ruling party is sort of enriching themselves at the cost of everyday citizens in Burundi. Burundi is one of the poorest countries in the world. A lot of people quote the statistic that 80% of the country is living on less than $2 a day. And a lot of Burundians look to their neighbor Rwanda and sort of see all the development that's happened there since their conflict ended. And they question why that same development hasn't reached Burundi. And one of the biggest issues there is the lack of jobs and the economy sort of suffering. And people do place that blame on President Nkurunziza and his cronies. It's just I don't think it was the major issue that galvanized the protests. I think people really just wanted new leaders. But I think it's one of the reasons why they're so angry at the president and his party is that sort of lack of economic development. People talk about this third term as a major issue, but when we talked to people on the streets and got away from politics, the number one thing mentioned was the lack of jobs and the lack of opportunity. And they directly attribute that to Nkurunziza and his party, who they think are unfairly enriching themselves while the rest of the country suffers.
Another interesting thing that I noticed from the dispatches was how engaged all of the civil society was, especially when you compare that with the stats about access to education. I mean, it just seemed like everyone was incredibly well informed and organizing in a pretty inspiring way.
Yeah, I mean, everyone there seemed to be extremely politically active, much more so than you find in America. People really cared deeply about what was going on. I think from what I was told, I'm not an expert on it, the emergence of civil society in Burundi has been a really great accomplishment. It wasn't a place, especially with media as well, the emergence of a free media. They're coming out of a decades-long conflict, and these civil society groups have emerged on their own. And they're engaged and they're active. And no matter what neighborhood you would go to, you would find people who had a lot to say about what was going on. Unfortunately, a lot of people that were leaders in civil society had to flee the country because they were under direct threat for speaking out, for being against the third mandate, and for just having opinions that differ from that of the ruling party. Civil society there is going to suffer. And you can see now, a prominent human rights activist was just targeted for assassination. So it's a very dangerous situation for people who have stayed inside the country that are involved in civil society. But if you watch our first dispatch, we interviewed a young woman named Kedi Nivibande, who is a poet and just took it upon herself to be politically active and to organize a women's protest. And there's tons of people out there in Burundi who are just really, really motivated and really want to see their country prosper and do better, and unfortunately are dealing with a really terrible situation.
One thing I was interested in as well to have your take on kind of do you see any of the early seeds of what could be called genocide? I know in 1972 and again in 1993, Burundi has this as their historical context. What do you think maybe the differences are? What is your feeling on that?
I mean, when you're dealing with this region, there's always going to be underlying ethnic issues. But this political crisis, I think a lot of people have trumpeted that, and it very well could happen. I didn't really see much evidence of that. No one really spoke along ethnic lines for the most part. You're going to see that stuff on Twitter. You're going to see it from propagandists. You're going to have to see it on people who want to sow discord among the population. But I didn't really get into any conversations with people where they were deliberately, saying anything about Hutus or Tutsis. There were always rumors and there was always talks, and I think that that's going to be an issue, of course. But this is a political crisis. It's not an ethnic crisis. The ruling party, members of the ruling party, have made attempts to sort of either directly accuse or imply that there's a an issue with some of the Tutsis that are involved. But that's not a feeling that you get when you're on the ground of something that's happening right now at this moment. So I wouldn't use the word genocide. I wouldn't use the term sort of ethnic conflict at this moment. I can't predict the future. Could always happen. I just didn't see the signs that it was going to happen while I was there.
Yeah, I think again, many people are saying that it's almost a step forward. You see many of the protests are, Hutu and Tutsi side by side. Do you think there are any parallels between the Imbonerakure and the Interahamwe of Rwanda?
I mean, that's a parallel that's brought up quite often. I mean, if you're talking about sort of, so the Imbonerakure aren't exactly a militia. They're just the youth members of a party. There are factions of them that have been armed, that have been carrying out attacks. That's a parallel that people have drawn, I think. And I think the reason people draw these parallels is to sort of get attention to a situation that people are ignoring. And the easiest way to do that is to sort of emphasize the potential for violence and the potential for ethnic conflict, because that is what draws Westerners' attention. They know what Hutu and Tutsi is. They don't know what the CNDD-FDD, the main political party there, is, or what the FNL, the main opposition party, is. But I don't know. I don't think you can really make those comparisons right now.
And what do you think about international pressure and what the AU has on its plate at this point? And all these different countries pulling funding when Burundi has so much of its budget by foreign funding. What are they going to do if this third mandate goes through and they have money?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, you've seen strong condemnations about the elections not being free and fair, people urging Nkurunziza not to run, but it all seems sort of impotent at this point. It just seems like he doesn't care and there's not enough sway that they have. I think the funding issue could become a big problem, but right now it doesn't. International pressure doesn't seem to be having any effect at all on what's going on there. Anything else? I mean, we're hitting everything right now.
I'm actually gonna thank you, Trevor, and we're gonna.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Danny.
Thank you, Trevor.
Yeah, man. Thanks for coming on, Danny. We're getting a lot of tweets, and we got this tweet from Elizabeth Horton that I want you to take a look at. Mm-hmm. What was you addressed this a little bit, but what was your sense of women's participation in the political process and the protests while you were in Burundi?
Well, if you watched the interview with Ketty, she had organized the women's only protest. I mean, the sad truth is that for most of the time we were there were very few protests. They had been repressed so violently, and there was such fear of what could happen that we didn't see many protests besides in a few days, the election day and right afterwards. And there were women presence, in the streets. I didn't see a major presence, but it's hard for me to judge that because we didn't see that many protests at all. And the political process, I mean, was just completely overshadowed by this fear of what was going on. It just, I couldn't really, I can't really get into specifics about that based on what we saw. I know that Ketty had made a serious effort and there were some prominent female voices, but I can't really attest to what exactly the participation is in the political process.
Cool. Well, thank you for answering that question. I hope Elizabeth...
Trying to answer.
Yeah, well, you did your best. So let's talk to Julia. Speaking of questions that you might not be able to answer. So, Julia, you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Hey, Julia. How's it going?
Hi, Danny. I'm good.
For those of you who don't know, Julia is a great reporter, and she was actually in Burundi with us and was very helpful at breaking down a lot of the stuff that happened in the months prior to our arrival, because she had been covering it for a while.
So as you mentioned, I had been in Burundi for a few months doing some reporting, and I think your team arrived at an interesting but mostly just a challenging time to report there, as I'm sure you noticed. At that point, a lot of the local journalists were out of jobs, and Burundians themselves were really fearful. You know, they had been facing this violent repression for any sort of political dissent, and at least in my experience at that point, people were really afraid to talk. So I'm curious about how you felt arriving on the ground there, if you were surprised by anything in particular after you had been following it for a couple months back home, and also just how you sort of navigated around the challenge, the fact that nobody really wanted to talk, and you know, were those challenges anything like challenges that you faced in other reporting climates? That was sort of like 3 questions, sorry.
No, it's a great question. It was really challenging when we arrived. There was sort of a lull in everything that was going on. All the protests that had been going on had been crushed. People were scared to talk. You know, if you watch a lot of our dispatches, I'm sure you had the same problem. No one wanted to show their face. So we had a lot of shots that were just from like here, from the neck down, because people were so scared of talking. And, you know, as a reporter, you know, it doesn't make for a great video, but at the same time, you don't want to put pressure on anyone, because the risk of danger to them and to their families is really that strong. There was such a pervasive sense of fear across everyone there that that people were hesitant to talk. You know, we had one situation where we were working on a story involving children and safety zones, and we had it all lined up. We met the NGO that was working on it in the morning, and the representative came and was like, look, we can't actually take you there. Our head has been followed by the intelligence agency, the SNR, and we just don't think it's safe right now. And that happened to us quite a few times, people who either we had interviews with or had things scheduled we just couldn't do. So yeah, it was definitely very hard. It was probably the most challenging situation that I've worked in as a reporter in that regard. Just because in most places people are very vocal, even if there's danger, they want to speak out. You know, every now and then you've got to protect people's identities and things of that nature, but I've never had it happen with almost every single interview that I did, where there was that much fear about what could possibly happen if someone spoke out. Even in you know, there's a scene where we go talk to we're at a rally for the CNDD-FDD, which is the ruling party, and we try to ask a supporter of that party why he supports that party. And a member of the youth wing of that party walks up and basically is like, no, you can't talk to them. And you kind of see this guy we literally asked him, why do you support this party? And we had to have an argument. We explained to the guy what we're doing. Eventually he let the man speak to us, but you know, that's how insane the sort of repression was, that even supporters of the ruling party were told not to speak with media.
Right, and you guys were working with a pretty well-respected local journalist, a pretty well-known local journalist, and did he have any insight as to exactly why people were so fearful in terms of like what the retribution would be, or any tips on how to convince people to talk in that kind of environment?
I mean, that's the weird thing. I know that, I mean, anyone sort of who was involved in the protest, anyone who had a high profile was targeted. But I think that fear became so pronounced that even regular citizens who might not have been active in the protest or just simply disagreed with the third mandate were just scared to speak. They just saw it as like anyone who differs from the line that the president is taking or disagrees with him is going to be gone after. And I don't know whether that's true or not, but enough people believed it where it definitely did seem like there was a lot of truth to it. Did you have some of the same issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like you said, that it's just a general culture of fear, and then there's obviously a very healthy rumor mill going on in the capital, at least. So whether or not it's actually related to real retribution that's going to happen, or just this culture of fear that is exacerbated by the rumor mill and the general intimidation that's going on there, for sure. I had a very similar experience. And I even found, I mean, like you said, it wasn't just the people who were openly protesting or speaking out against the president's third term, but, you know, even supporters and just CNDD party members were even nervous about talking to the press. I mean, they had been given a pretty clear mandate from the party not to talk to journalists, particularly, evil foreign journalists. So I found it pretty challenging in that regard as well.
Yeah, I mean, there was, it was frustrating. It was definitely, you felt like you couldn't do your job right, and that at the same time, you don't want to put pressure on anyone who feels unsafe to go on camera because it's not worth it. But I think,
Right.
I think everyone there, all our colleagues that we spoke to, everyone had that same sense of frustration of like, how do we cover this now? Like, what can we do?
Right, you definitely had to get creative. And it was frustrating on another level because Burundians clearly have a lot to say, and they're, in the months leading up to that time, they had been very politically active. So it was very jarring for them to sort of suddenly not be willing to or not able to talk to us. But I have another question about some reporting you did outside of Burundi. I knew you guys were in Rwanda for the first dispatch and actually hitched a ride across the border with you. But that perspective in Rwanda, I think, was unique from what a lot of us were doing when we were in the country at the time. So I'm just curious about how talking to the people who had recently fled Burundi, who were living either in Kigali or in a refugee camp in Rwanda, how talking with those Burundians sort of shaped your view of the conflict generally. And I'm also curious about whether or not you're still in touch with any of them, if they're planning to go back, or just how they're sort of experiencing the conflict in their country from outside of their country now.
We actually have a clip of that. Do you guys want to roll the clip of John, who we met in the Mahama camp?
Pour le moment, je suis peur d'y retourner dans mon pays parce que je sais que la situation est toujours dangereuse. Mon père a été assassiné par les jeunes du parti politique, surnommés les Imbonerakure. Quelques groupes de personnes sont venus. Ils ont toqué sur la porte. Mon père a résisté d'ouvrir, mais ils ont essayé d'ouvrir avec force. Et par conséquent, ils ont parvenu à y entrer. Et ils ont tué mon père. Moi, il m'a poignardé. Et j'ai été brusquement tombé. Ils croyaient que j'étais mort, mais malheureusement, je respirais un peu.
So yeah, there was that, and then there was all the rumors that they were hearing in the camps. I'm still in touch with a few of them. They've actually, they've gone to Kigali to find jobs. That young man is looking for a job in Kigali right now. So they don't really see any hope in returning, even if there is a political resolution right now. But yeah, I think I expected to get there and there to be a lot more overt sort of repression and chaos, but it's really all under the radar. You have the gunshots at night, you have the violence at night, but it really wasn't, you could walk around during the day and besides it being a little quiet, not know that anything was wrong. So thank you very much for joining us, Julia. I really appreciate it, and I really appreciate all the help you gave us while we were there as well.
Thank you, it's my pleasure.
All right, Danny. So we got a couple other tweets that I want you to take a look at. This one came in just a couple seconds ago, and you talked about this a bit, but can you talk about the state of journalism inside of Burundi for Burundian journalists? What's happening to journalists who are critical of the government that's in power? And were you ever afraid while you were reporting? I know you're never afraid, but...
I'm often afraid, mostly though in New York in this office. Yeah, critical journalists are being targeted, they're being attacked. Some have been killed, others have been jailed, and that's not a new thing. That was going on a year ago, 2 years ago. Recently, there was a big assassination of the head of the intelligence agency, and an R5 journalist that everyone knows that does a great job and was very critical of the government, was beaten pretty badly while taking photographs of that. So local journalists, we did our dispatch 3 was about a local paper called Iwachu, which was sort of the last of the free press that was operating, or independent press that was operating. And they were fearful. They were scared. We had a situation when a local journalist that we had been working alongside was threatened and harassed. They're extremely brave. As a Western reporter, as a foreign journalist, there is a degree of safety that you have while working there. We did have 1 or 2 situations where we were told specifically that if we went somewhere, they would think of us as active in the protest movement and would target us. I don't know if that was of just sort of BS threats or whether that was real or not. But we didn't have a pervasive sense of fear. But among local journalists, it's a really, really bad situation. Many have fled. Others have been imprisoned. The ones who are still there are braver than I could say I'd ever be. And we interviewed the head of that paper, Iwachu, the local paper, and he was just like, yeah, we're crazy. That's the only way to explain it. We went to their offices of other journalist enterprises that have been firebombed. It's a really bad situation there. The press freedom there is heavily restricted, and they will be threatened, they'll be harassed. There are phone calls, they're targeted. Yeah, it's bad. It's very bad.
Well, I hope that answered your question, Last Cajun. Dan, let's say, speaking of journalists in Burundi, let's go to Burundi right now. We've got a Ryan who's in Burundi and on Skype, so let's hope his connection holds. Hey, Ryan, you still there?
I am, thanks.
Hey, Ryan, how's it going?
You guys, thanks for doing this thing.
Thank you for taking the time to talk to us.
Well, I've got a number of questions, and I think a big factor was the question in journalism. I'm glad that others have asked about that. I'd like to ask you, as Julia mentioned, in the time that you got here, it's quite a difficult time here in Burundi. We've seen, I think, a significant change over the last few weeks in the dynamic here. Just to illustrate that, often I would talk to young people on the street in the early days of protests, and there was always a strong sense of hope that the international community would intervene, that Samantha Power would come and save them. Whereas now, I talked to a kid on the street today who actually said he was very cheerful, which struck me, and he said, "Don't worry, the president will be dead soon." There's been a real shift in, I think, strategy among some in the opposition anyway. I'm wondering, in the time that you were here, did you get a sense that there are still young people who are interested in negotiated solutions, or are they really on the verge of war?
It's a really hard one to answer, because you did hear a lot of talk. Even since before I got there was always talk that the war was about to start, that the country was about to be torn apart, that things were about to reach a fever point. And even when we talked to people in these neighborhoods, they were like, "It's coming, don't worry. Tomorrow or next week, it's going to happen." And after a while, that just started to feel like they were just sort of holding out this hope that would happen. I think there was a complete, once the elections weren't going to be delayed again, I think people sort of gave up hope that there would be a political solution. I think they want a political solution. I don't think anyone there wants a war. But there were a lot of predictions for war. After a while, it really seemed like the opposition just wasn't organized well enough to pose any sort of physical threat to what was going on. But we have the recent assassination of Adolf Shimiramana, who was this intelligence chief. And a lot of people think he's the one who orchestrated all the crackdowns, all the, as I'm sure you know, all the assassinations, torture. He's supposed to be personally responsible for some of the torture, and he was seen he was that name that was whispered in dark corners as being the one responsible. Everyone is scared of him, and he was killed in an ambush a few days ago by people dressed in army clothes, and that actually shook me. I was shocked that could happen, and now I think that feeling. Just from the young kids I was mentioning, Muhammad, that I spoke to recently, from other people, that everyone thinks that there's a war coming soon. I don't know how to gauge that. I'm sure you found yourself. There's so many, and there's been a few articles written about this recently. There are so many rumors in Burundi. It's almost insane how far things spread on Twitter about rebel attacks here and this happening and the army splitting and all that, and it's really hard to gauge that. Even in the country, you would follow up on these things and find nothing, and it's extremely hard to gauge. So I don't know. I think everyone hopes for a political solution, but that seems less and less likely. And once General Adolf got killed, it just seems like things could very easily hit a downward slope. And then you have another situation where Agatha Mrwasa, who was head of the main opposition party, just signed up to be vice president, which is also extremely weird. And I think that people thought that he would be the main sort of, he's a former militant, that he would be a sort of main leader if there was this opposition attack. And now he's a part of the government. I can't make sense of it. I mean, can you?
There's been, it's a lot about Burundian politics is indeed hard to make sense of. I think, as some commentators have pointed out with Agathon Rwasa, he was in a tough situation, and I think he opted to become, to a certain extent, part of the political system in order, for one thing, to protect himself, and generally, his partisans, FNL youth especially, were really coming under fire, and generally to prepare. I think he's looking ahead now to 2020, thinking that he can have a run at presidency then. Before that, I think he understood that he wasn't in a position to do much anyway. And just a clarifying point, he was elected vice president, first vice president of the National Assembly, not vice president of the state. Mm-hmm. Although his role in the future is still a bit unclear. If I may, another point, I think it's important to recall. I'm sure you heard. This crisis in Burundi and the discontent we see, especially among people in Bujumbura, really preceded the third term issue. This was going on well before. There were even protests, against the high cost of living before April. And I'm wondering, in general, when you talk to especially young people here, what were the issues that they cited most often as worrying outside of the third term?
Jobs. I mean, that was it from the start. It was jobs. It was a lack of opportunity. And a lack of development, which I think relates to economic factors, but it was all just like, there's nothing for us here. The president and his party have done little for us. We need opportunity, and we don't have it. Once you got deeper than the third mandate, that was the jobs was it. That was the number one thing that came up. I'm being told I think we have to move a little forward. We're behind schedule, but thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate the questions and you taking the time to help us out, and stay safe over there.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. I appreciate the extra effort to get online. So Danny, we're getting a lot of tweets right now, and I want you to take a look at two of them that are kind of related. This one from Mahima wants to know what influence does ethnicity have on the political situation on the ground. And we got another tweet on the same vein, asking if Burundians and others on the ground are talking about the ethnic divides in the country as much as the global media is. So what's your sense? Is this media hype, or is it actually a ethnic divide?
I think there's always going to be that concern when it comes to a place like Burundi, but I do think it's being talked about more in the global media than it is on the ground. People, either didn't talk about it or mentioned that they were united, because I think they know that when people look to Burundi, Rwanda, they don't know a lot about the situation. Most observers don't know a lot about the situation. All they know is that Hutus, Tutsis, genocide. I would love to say that it is overhyped, and I hope it stays as just the thing that's overhyped. But like I said, I can't predict the future. There's a danger that it could fall into that. But right now, that really wasn't even something that was mentioned to us on the ground at all. No one was like, Hutus are this, the Tutsis are that. This is all a conspiracy theory that they're involved. It didn't seem like, it seemed like there was a sort of united front against the third mandate, or a united front for the third mandate that didn't have anything to do with ethnicity. Of course, Twitter, rumors, politicians using it to further their own agendas, which I think is always the danger, that if things deteriorate, you could have people, that's the easiest thing for a demagogue to do, is to rally against an ethnicity to gather a support base of people who are going to blindly support him or her. And there's always a danger that could happen. We did not see that happening when we were there, and hopefully that does not happen again. But I think also one of the reasons the global media hypes it is because it does get attention, and it does cause people to pay attention to what's going on in the country. And of course, when I was researching this in January and February, I was very focused on that issue. But after talking to a number of analysts and people in the country, it became clear that this wasn't an ethnic situation; it was a political situation.
Well, I hope that answers everyone's questions. And I'm glad you were able to shed some light there, Danny. So we're getting near the end of our show, but we still have a couple more people on Skype. Let's say hey to Kara.
Hey, Kara. For those of you who don't know, Kara is what you would call an actual expert in Burundi. She has written a lot for the Washington Post, and she was very, very helpful as I was doing research for this story. So what's Twitter? Kara E. Jones. You should definitely follow her if you're Prof. P-R-O-F
Kara Jones.
C-A-R-A-E-J-O-N-E-S. If you're interested in Burundi, she is definitely one of the people you should follow, and you should read her work at the Washington Post.
Yeah. I tweet about other stuff too besides just Burundi. It just happens to be a place I've invested a lot of my life in.
There you go.
So Danny, thanks for your monumental reporting on this. As you know, I was not a huge fan of Vice before. I've expressed my concern with some of the things that you guys have done, but you guys did an absolutely fantastic job. And I'm really, really glad that you guys brought a lot of these dynamics to the rest of the world. So as I always say on Twitter, chapeau, bro.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So I have a question though about the rural and the regular people. So Burundi, is this really, really weird place where like most of the population is farmers. They don't actually like participate in politics that much. Bujumbura is kind of this weird kind of anomaly in the middle of the sea of people who do other things. So what is the impact of violence on those people? How are kind of like the small, the paysans handling what's going on there?
That's a really good question, and I think that you see the CNDD-FDD does have Bujumbura and Bujumbura rural. The more urban areas are really against the third mandate. We didn't spend that much time in the rural areas, and I wish we had. But when we were at that CNDD-FDD rally, one of the supporter who spoke to us basically was like, "Look, we're not hiding in the bush anymore, catching diseases, fearful of war. Like we like the president now. Like he took us out of that." And they were very, very supportive of that. I think that the rumors, a lot of the people that we spoke to that had fled, that were in the camps, were from rural areas, because I think there's still fear there that they don't know what's coming. So once the radio stations were shut down, they don't really have a good way of finding out what the news is. So they would hear these rumors about potential ethnic conflict, about Imbonerakure sort of rampaging, and they were extremely scared about what was going on. But I think when it all comes down to it, most people are just concerned with putting food on the table, security, jobs, and things along those lines. That was one of our regrets, that we didn't get up country a little bit more, and we had plans to do that, but things just kept happening in the city that we had to stay. Plus, there were always rumors that something was going to happen tomorrow. We didn't want to miss anything.
Right.
But that's something that you're very engaged in. How do you think things differ in the rural areas than in the city?
Yeah, it's difficult because you always hear that Nkurunziza is incredibly popular in the rural areas, that people love him. And I've done a lot of work with him actually up country. I've been places where, he's been greeted, with open arms by rural people. But I think that dynamic is changing. I think, people, as this conflict drives on and whatever it becomes, I don't know that that's going to stay the same. It's hard to know because you guys can't work, people like me who do surveying and stuff like that can't work. And there's a real lack of information, I think, coming from Burundi now. But one of the rumors I did want to ask you about, too, is this rumor about the army. So we keep hearing that the army is very divided, that they're likely to split, that they have two mindsets when it comes to violence against civilians. Did you see any of that while you were on the ground? Did the army ever target people, or did they not target people? Or how did you see the relationship between the army and the population?
The population, there were stories about the army protecting protesters when the police were firing on them. There's definitely a lot more anger directed towards the police than the army. They've been trained by the Americans. They seem like quite a force when we saw them. There was a lot of them. They were heavily armed. From people we spoke to on the street, they weren't really, there was very little anger directed at the army. And there were always rumors that the army is going to help the people. Some of the army is giving weapons to the people and all that. I can't verify any of that. There was right. A lot of stories of that. There was a rumor on Twitter yesterday that two different army forces were facing off at an area that was actually right near our hotel. I don't think anything came of that, but that's always been the fear that when the army finally splits, that's what's going to bring the country into civil war. It's hard to say. I mean, we didn't see any evidence of that when we were covering that weird military presser when they were like showing off the weapons. You know, off camera to a few reporters and to our driver, the army guys were like, "None of this is true. Like this is made up." But I don't know. I mean, there's also the issue is if this funding stops, if the army stops being paid, if they're pulled from the African Union forces, that's could potentially lead to a lot of unrest. But yeah, we didn't see any visual evidence of the army really splitting at all. You know, they manned checkpoints. They were a lot easier to deal with, I think, than the police were. And I think the people have a real, almost like pride in them, and they're seen as a unifying force. But yeah, again, there's these rumors. We didn't really get to, they weren't really talking to press. We didn't get to dive too far into it. But from initial impressions, I didn't see it. I think it definitely, I'm sure there are splits. There was a coup attempt. And I think this killing of General Adolf too could have a lot of consequences. And they say that the people who killed him were dressed in army fatigues. Who knows who they were? They could have been. I mean, there's rumors they were Rwandan agents. It could have been a rogue group. There was also rumors too that battalions in this part of the country were breaking off and all that. It was hard to verify any of that. It doesn't seem like that happened. Otherwise, I'm sure there would have been a lot more violence that would have occurred. But it was very hard to gauge exactly what that situation was with the army.
Yeah. Well, I know we're running out of time, so I'm just going to ask you a fun question.
Yes.
What's your favorite Burundian beer?
Well, I mean, Primus was the beer of choice. Primus.
Yeah.
Primus was the beer of choice for everyone. Burundi actually, where we were staying, the French expat community has done a great job, and our fixer too was just like a big wine guy. So we actually ended up drinking a lot of red wine in Burundi, which I didn't. It's really hot. You would not expect that, but there was a lot of wine flowing, much more so than beer.
Okay.
But I definitely recommend that if you are going to drink, some of the lakeside clubs, Bora Bora, sit there, watch the sunset. Yeah. It's very beautiful location. That's the thing too that I didn't know before I got there. Bujumbura, before this crisis and hopefully after it's over, is like an insane party town.
Yeah.
Everyone was like, all the UN people were like, yeah, everyone comes over from Goma and from Kigali, and we rage till 8 o'clock in the morning. I don't think people know that about Burundi, but we went out to a few of the clubs and it was a very toned down atmosphere, but you could definitely tell that when times are calm there, it's definitely a place you want to go on vacation.
Yeah, you guys will have to come back when the music scene is up and going, because the music scene there is pretty killer.
Yeah. I mean, we heard our driver play the same 7 tracks over and over and over. Only half of which were Celine Dion. Celine Dion. But the other half were really good local Burundian, a lot of Congolese music too. I got really into French rap. I don't speak a word of French really, but I'm gonna learn it just so I can understand the French rap songs because they all sound like they're saying fantastic things.
Yeah, cool.
Well, thank you for joining us, and thank you so much for all your help in our research leading up to this, and for really giving us your insight and helping out and then supporting us while we were there. We really appreciate it. And hopefully things will calm down and we can go celebrate on the shores of the lake and have a good time.
Anytime.
All right, thanks, Kara, for coming on. So, Danny, we're just about at the end of the show, but we got a lot of really good tweets. So I just want to have you address these two and these issues that they're bringing up. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce this name. I'm sorry, but Danny, do you think the international community will intervene in Burundi before the country collapses? And also, how is the international community, specifically Burundi's neighbors in Africa, affected by the crisis? And do you think that those nations might be intervening in Burundi's affairs?
One at a time. You're overwhelming me right now. Let me think. So Amahoro Iwachu actually means peace in Kirundi, and Iwachu means home, I believe. I just wanted to point that out to show how much I know. I don't think the international community will intervene before Burundi collapses, if it is going to collapse. I think that, unfortunately, there's just not enough self-interest for the international community to intervene. And they don't seem to have taken an aggressive approach besides issuing stern condemnations. Maybe the UN, but I feel like the UN has its hands full in that region in general. but I doubt it, unfortunately. I don't think there's enough, like I said, there's not enough self-interest. Burundi doesn't have enough natural resources for people to exploit, but I mean, there's hope that the African Union, that the EAC, the East African community could get involved and try to negotiate something, but I don't, if it hasn't happened now, I don't see it happening. Of course, if things do end up, the worst of the worst happens and it does become an ethnic conflict, there's always a chance that people will sort of pay more attention to that. As far as the certain nations favor one side, when people ask about certain nations, they're always talking about Rwanda. And that is sort of the elephant in the room. People on the ruling party side are always accusing Rwanda of fomenting conflict, of supporting the coup and further coup attempts and destabilization. Occasionally they'll say it by name. Most of the times they try not to. It's hard to gauge. I mean, Rwanda has definitely issued statements saying that they would be willing to get involved if they felt like the Tutsi population was being targeted or if they felt like it was going to destabilize the region, which it does have the potential to do. But if they do favor one, if other nations favor one side, no one's really. Of course, Uganda was heavily involved in these negotiations that were going on before the election, and they didn't seem to really put up much of a fuss about Nkurunziza staying in power. But the big question is, of course, Rwanda, how they're involved, if they're involved, and if they're going to get more involved. That is the number one question, I think, on everyone's mind. There's a million rumors about that. I can't verify any of them. There was a rebel attack while we were there that allegedly the rebels crossed in from the Rwandan border. If they did cross in from the Rwandan border, it's very unlikely that Rwanda did not know that they were doing that. But of course, we don't know whether Rwanda was supporting them in any sort of way or whether they just sort of allowed it to happen. We don't even know if they did cross in from the Rwandan border. That is the number one question on everyone's mind. I keep repeating that because I'm running out of things to say, but also because it is very important. If this thing does devolve further into chaos, Rwanda is going to play a very prominent role, but we're just not exactly sure what that role will be.
All right, Danny. Well, listen, I'm sure you could talk about this all day, but I think this is the end of our show. So why don't you say goodbye to everyone at home and tell us if you're planning on following up on this story.
Guys, thank you very much for tuning in. We will, of course, keep following up on this story. We're in contact with our people there. If things turn out like, if things look like they're gonna devolve even further, I think we'll definitely be headed back. But who knows what's gonna happen in the future? The hope, of course, is that things will resolve. But we'll see. Things seem to be spiraling a little more out of control right now than when we were there. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you for paying attention. Please go to vicenews.com. Watch all our dispatches over and over and over. Send them to your friends, your family, maybe a girl you like, maybe a boy you like, your coworkers, mass emails, things of that nature. Just send a link out, tweet about it, Facebook, Snapchat, Spotify, whatever. Just do that. Please tune in next week to On the Line at the same time. I don't know who the guests will be. If we can't find anyone, I will be discussing beard grooming tips for those of you at home that are interested.
Yeah, we're just going to do that. Thanks, everyone, for watching.
Thanks again.
The election may be over. We know who the winner is going to be, but anger is still really high. People here are not happy that the killings have continued.